Hey guys, tonight we venture across time and sand, stepping softly into the golden dust of ancient Egypt. The air shimmers with heat, the distant call of the Nile echoes faintly, and the looming pyramids pierce the sky like jagged teeth. You brush past towering statues with eyes that seem to follow you, half man, half god, silent, eternal watchers over the desert's edge. You feel the weight of thousands of years settle on your shoulders, a sacred hum of a world obsessed with power, divinity, and the promise of life beyond death. But don't get too comfortable. Trust me, you probably won't survive being a pharaoh. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments so I can see just how far this little journey is reaching. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the banks of the Nile, watching the great river roll endlessly toward the sea. It's not just a river, it's the beating heart of Egypt, the sacred artery that nourishes the fields and the people. But high above, in palaces gilded with gold and adorned with strange symbols, the pharaoh reigns. Not as a mere king. No, the pharaoh is more than that. He is Horus on earth, the living god, the bridge between the mortal and the divine. When he speaks, the gods themselves are believed to lean in and listen. Becoming a pharaoh isn't as simple as being born to the right parents, though that certainly helps. There's ceremony, drama, and sometimes, let's be honest, a little palace intrigue. You're not just inheriting a throne. You're stepping into the sandals of a deity. People will bow, temples will sing your name. But behind those songs, there's always the subtle rattle of power's price tag. You ascend a staircase carved with images of lotus flowers and falcons. Every step feels like a lifetime. Soon, you'll be crowned with the double crown, white for Upper Egypt, red for Lower Egypt, the two lands united under your rule. But historians still argue whether the unification was truly peaceful or if it came at the tip of a bloodied spear. You can almost hear the sacred chants as priests raise incense, the smell of myrrh thick in the air. A scribe unfurls a long papyrus scroll, carefully inscribed with the names of all who came before you. It's your moment to join the line of immortals. But you might want to wipe that sweat off your brow, because those crowns are surprisingly heavy. And as you settle into your new life as a living god, you'll quickly discover it's not all gold and glory. Your days begin before sunrise, greeted by officials with scrolls full of problems. Crop failures, border skirmishes, a priest somewhere claiming the gods are angry. Your inbox is never empty. You sip a pomegranate drink as a servant fans you with ostrich feathers, but your mind is already on the day's temple rituals and the demands of your advisors, who are perhaps just a little too interested in your health. You travel by bark along the Nile, visiting temples where statues of deities loom larger than life. You offer gifts to Amun-Ra, the sun god, whose golden disk seems to burn just for you. But privately, you may wonder, does the sun really rise because you command it? Or is that just what everyone tells you? While you preside over the construction of grand monuments, you can't help noticing the laborers, sunburned, tired, hauling limestone blocks, glance at you with a mixture of awe and quiet resentment. Historians still debate whether pyramid builders were slaves or well-fed, highly respected workers. Either way, You probably won't see them at your next royal feast. And those feasts, by the way, are no joke. Imagine endless platters of roasted goose, honey cakes, sweet figs, and freshly baked bread. But don't get too greedy. One overindulgent pharaoh allegedly died from eating too much melon. No one wants that on their tomb wall. But perhaps the most curious part of being a pharaoh is how obsessed you become with death while you're still very much alive. Your entire reign feels like one long preparation for what happens after. You personally oversee the planning of your tomb, a secret chamber carved deep within the earth, or stacked sky-high with polished stone. You select the finest artisans to craft golden sarcophagi, fill the burial chambers with riches, and commission elaborate spells meant to guide your spirit through the treacherous landscapes of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. There's an almost frantic race to finish your tomb before you, well, need it. But some pharaohs, like the famous Sneferu, change their minds mid-build, leaving behind half-finished pyramids scattered across the desert like forgotten Lego projects. You meet your advisors in a cool, shaded hall where lotus flowers float in serene pools. They present you with reports, border threats from Nubia, grain tallies from the granaries, and updates on your pyramid's progress. You absent-mindedly twirl a gold ring on your finger as you listen, but you can't help but fixate on one thing. Will it be enough? Will your name survive the centuries, or will it crumble like so many tomb walls eroded by time? And what of the gods? You've spent your life building temples, performing rituals, and wearing the regalia of a living deity. But as you watch the sun dip behind the pyramids, a part of you quietly wonders, are you worshiping the gods? Or are you just another player in a game whose rules no one really understands? You stroll through the palace gardens as servants tend to exotic plants brought from distant lands. Peacocks strut nearby, their feathers shimmering like scattered jewels. A monkey, gifted from a foreign envoy, tugs playfully at your robe. It's all very grand, but even here, you can't fully escape the pressures of rule. A priest whispers about omens seen in the stars. A scribe delivers troubling news about grain shortages. And your wife, not your first, probably not your last, seeks your attention for matters of the royal children. There's always another decision to make, another corner of your sprawling kingdom that needs your divine touch. And yet, when you pass the towering statues of your predecessors, their faces chipped and weathered by centuries, you can't help but feel their silent warning. Power fades. Names are forgotten. Even the most sacred monuments can be swallowed by the desert. But for now, the Nile still flows, the people still chant your name, and the sun still rises. The sun beats down as you glide along the Nile in your royal bark, its polished wood creaking softly as oars dip in and out of the shimmering water. The river breeze tugs at the linen canopy, offering you a brief reprieve from the suffocating heat. On both banks, farmers work the fertile black soil, their backs bent, their feet sunk deep into the mud. They look up as you pass, their voices rising in chants of praise, though you suspect their minds are more on their next harvest than your divine glory. But ruling Egypt isn't just about pageantry. Oh no, it's a logistical nightmare, a never-ending juggling act. You oversee armies, tax collectors, temple priests, and local governors, each with their own agendas. The vizier, your right-hand man, keeps the royal machine running, but you still have to keep an eye on him. After all, historians still argue whether some viziers subtly manipulated young pharaohs from behind the scenes, steering the kingdom without ever wearing the crown themselves. As you step onto the dock, the scent of freshly baked barley bread mingles with the sharp tang of river fish laid out to dry. You stroll toward a temple complex, its grand pylons towering over the city, the walls covered in meticulously carved hieroglyphs, singing your eternal praises. But let's be honest, many of those inscriptions are carefully curated versions of your life story. No one's chiseling in your embarrassing defeat last spring, or that awkward moment when you tripped over your ceremonial robe in front of a foreign ambassador. Inside the temple, priests in crisp white robes burn incense and recite ancient prayers. You move through shadowy halls where statues of the gods loom in silence, their stone eyes glimmering in the flickering torchlight. The god Amun watches you from his gilded shrine, and as you kneel, the polished floor cool against your skin, you briefly wonder, are you speaking to him or just to yourself? Your priests claim the gods are pleased, but they've been saying that for generations. Still, you go along with the rituals. Better not to risk offending a deity who might send a particularly aggressive plague of locusts your way. And you can't escape the pressure to expand Egypt's borders. The generals stand at attention, maps spread before them, their fingers tracing possible conquests. Nubia to the south offers gold, incense, and precious hardwoods. To the northeast, the Hittites keep poking the edges of your territory. You must decide, diplomacy or war. Historians still debate whether some campaigns were strategic brilliance or just royal vanity disguised as divine mission. But regardless, you can't pass up the chance to parade through Thebes with a line of chained prisoners and carts piled high with treasure. Nothing says, "I'm still in charge," quite like a victory procession. As you sip date wine at a palace feast, you overhear scribes recounting the tale of a pharaoh who supposedly never lost a battle. You smirk. Everyone knows battles are messy affairs, and sometimes a tactical retreat just gets rewritten later as a noble stand. Speaking of embellishment, that colossal statue of you near the palace, you might have insisted it be just a little taller than your predecessors. Just a smidge. You lean back on plush cushions as dancers spin and musicians pluck at harps. Your royal children giggle nearby, chasing a tame ibex through the courtyard. You've probably got dozens of children, depending on how many wives and concubines you've collected. The royal family tree is more of a tangled vine, really, and historians still argue whether some of your children were actually your nephews, cousins, or just ambitious officials retroactively claiming blood ties. But your mind drifts again to the afterlife. You've ordered the finest artisans to carve your name deep into stone, to craft golden treasures that will accompany you beyond death. You even make time to tour your tomb's progress, inspecting the hieroglyphs that will tell your story for eternity. Though rumor has it, one particularly impatient artisan accidentally carved the wrong name into a royal sarcophagus once. Imagine explaining that mix-up to Osiris. Speaking of tombs, you're constantly battling grave robbers, those pesky intruders with a knack for slipping past even the most elaborate traps. You've ordered false chambers, hidden passages, and cursed inscriptions to deter them. But let's be honest, if someone's determined enough, no amount of stone doors or ominous warnings about death in 1,000 bites is really going to stop them. You try to enforce loyalty through opulent gifts and careful marriages, but betrayal always lingers like a scorpion beneath a rock. A distant governor grows a little too independent. A priest quietly amasses too much influence. A half-brother raises an eyebrow just a little too high when you walk into the room. The palace might be filled with sweet-smelling oils and lotus blossoms, but there's always a faint stench of ambition. One day, as you walk along the temple colonnades, you pass the statue of a forgotten ruler, their name chiseled away, their memory deliberately erased. Damnatio memoriae, the ultimate punishment. To be scrubbed from history as if you never existed. You shudder. To a pharaoh, that's worse than death. You double down on your legacy project. More temples, more statues. You send expeditions to the turquoise mines of Sinai and the cedar forests of Lebanon. Every ship that returns laden with exotic goods whispers your glory into the wind. But time is always pressing in. Even as you sit on your gilded throne, you can feel the quiet tick of mortality. And yet, amid all this grandeur, you're still human. You get annoyed when your sandals chafe. You secretly dread those long religious festivals where you have to stand perfectly still while priests chant for hours. You occasionally sneak away from court to hunt hippos along the Nile, a pastime that's exhilarating but slightly terrifying. Hippos are not to be trifled with. More than a few nobles have met their end in those muddy waters. At night, you lie on linen sheets embroidered with golden thread, the scent of lotus oil on your skin, and you think about your place in the endless scroll of Egyptian history. Will your statues still stand when the sand has swallowed your palace? Will your name still be whispered when your bones have turned to dust? The next morning, as the sun blazes over the desert, you rise again, the weight of the double crown heavy on your head, your duties waiting. You take one last glance at the shimmering river outside your window and step into the long, dusty corridor that is your reign. You step onto a barge again, this time heading south toward the sacred city of Abydos, where generations of pharaohs have made pilgrimages to honor Osiris, Lord of the afterlife. The journey is long, the Nile winding like a great green snake through the golden desert. But you pass the time sipping fig beer and tossing breadcrumbs to the crocodiles that lazily surface alongside your boat. You know, those same crocodiles the priests claim are sacred incarnations of Sobek, though you can't help wondering if the one eyeing your foot a little too eagerly got the memo. The Nile isn't just your kingdom's lifeblood. It's your freeway, your grocery store, your trade route. Without it, the sands would swallow everything. You can almost feel its pulse beneath you as the oarsmen chant in rhythm. But you also know that the river isn't always so generous. When the annual inundation comes up short, famine creeps in like a silent shadow. Historians still debate how much these erratic flood patterns contributed to the collapse of entire dynasties. You reach Abydos, the temple walls adorned with vivid scenes of pharaohs offering gifts to Osiris. And you marvel at how the stories of your predecessors loom so large, sometimes larger than life, sometimes carefully edited. You walk among the towering columns, each one carved with spells meant to protect the departed kings on their journey to the afterlife. The scent of myrrh clings to the air, sweet and smoky, as if even the stone is trying to remember something. It's here you begin to understand how obsessed your ancestors were with legacy. They didn't just want to rule, they wanted to rule forever. They didn't just want tombs, they wanted fortresses of memory. You start thinking maybe your own tomb needs just a little more flair. You call for your royal architects. They bow deeply, clutching scrolls and reed pens, ready to etch out your vision. Should it be a pyramid, a rock-cut tomb? Something no grave robber could ever imagine? You're tempted to demand a pyramid taller than anyone else's. But by now, even you have to admit, those massive triangles practically scream, "Hey, treasure buried here." Historians still argue whether the shift to hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings was pure security or part of a deeper religious evolution. You choose the valley, a secretive canyon nestled in the Theban cliffs, where the entrances can be easily concealed. You send teams of workers to carve deep into the rock, chiseling tunnels that twist and descend like the coils of a sleeping cobra. You order false doors, hidden shafts, and sacred curses to guard your resting place. Whoever disturbs this tomb shall be devoured by crocodiles in this world and the next, you dictate with a sly grin, knowing full well it probably won't stop the really determined ones. But you're not just building a tomb, you're curating an afterlife. You commission golden chariots, jeweled daggers, and exquisitely crafted ushabti figurines, little servant statues that will, according to belief, spring to life to serve you beyond death. You even instruct your artisans to paint jars of honey, baskets of fruit, and pitchers of beer on the tomb walls, because apparently you can summon snacks with the right spell work. Honestly, modern meal delivery apps have nothing on ancient Egyptian magic. And then there's your burial mask, gold inlaid with lapis lazuli and obsidian, the serene face that will become the symbol of your immortality. You inspect the progress personally, running your fingers along the cool, smooth contours. They say the eyes should gleam with eternity, but you suggest adding just a hint of a knowing smirk. You know, something that says, yes, I conquered nations, but I also enjoyed a good festival. Speaking of festivals, you throw yourself into preparations for the Opet festival in Thebes. A grand procession where the statue of Amun is carried from Karnak to Luxor. The streets flood with music, perfumed oils, and celebratory cheers. You wave to the crowds, their hands reaching out, not for you, but for the blessings you supposedly channel from the gods. Still, it feels good to bask in their adoration, even if you suspect some are just there for the free beer. Historians still debate whether these religious festivals were primarily acts of devotion or carefully staged political theater designed to reinforce the pharaoh's divine status. Probably both. You certainly don't mind that they serve as a handy reminder that your power flows from the gods. Or at least, that's the story everyone's agreed to tell. And here's something deliciously quirky. Some pharaohs insisted on racing their own chariots during festivals to prove their vitality, even in old age. You briefly imagine yourself thundering past the temples at breakneck speed, your royal wig flapping like an over-eager ibis. Maybe not your best look, but the people would love it. Back at the palace, you oversee trade expeditions heading to Punt, that elusive land of incense, ivory, and baboons. You've never seen Punt yourself, but you've got vivid reliefs in your mortuary temple depicting strange stilt houses and odd-looking trees. Historians still can't agree on where Punt actually was. Somalia? Yemen? Somewhere we haven't even rediscovered yet? The mystery lingers like the scent of frankincense drifting across the Red Sea. You relish the exotic gifts that pour in. Golden rings, delicate glassware, bundles of cinnamon and myrrh, even a giraffe or two for your palace menagerie. The scribes make sure to note every item, every tribute, reinforcing your image as the pharaoh who brings abundance. Yet despite all this wealth, you sense that your people's faith in your divinity isn't what it used to be. They honor you, yes, but perhaps a little more out of tradition than awe. You hear whispers in the markets, scribes telling stories of pharaohs from long ago who supposedly could summon storms or walk unharmed through fire. You're not so sure they ever could, but the nostalgia is hard to compete with. So you double down. You commission even grander temples, larger statues, more lavish festivals. The message is clear. You are the chosen of the gods. Your reign is the golden thread holding Egypt together. But when you sneak away from the ceremonies, out to the palace gardens, where lotus flowers float on dark ponds, you wonder, will all this truly last? Will the future remember you as you wish? Or will time smudge the details, twist the stories, leave only fragments? A servant arrives with a tray of honey cakes and pomegranate wine. You smile, taking a bite as you watch the sunset gild the temple spires. For now, you are Pharaoh. You build, you rule, you dream of eternity. But you can feel the weight of the centuries pressing in, the long shadow of those who came before you, and those who will surely follow. Your eyes drift toward the mountains beyond the Valley of the Kings, their jagged silhouettes dark against the fading sky. Somewhere deep within those cliffs, workers are still chiseling out your eternal resting place, their copper tools tapping out a rhythm that will one day be silenced by shifting sands and forgotten entrances. You picture them by flickering torchlight, their sweaty hands tracing sacred symbols over walls they know they may never see again. You wonder if they truly believe in the spells they carve, or if they simply believe in the weight of your authority. And as the seasons turn, you begin to notice something else. Even the humblest of your people now mimic your afterlife obsession. Farmers bury clay figures with their dead, hoping these tiny helpers will plow phantom fields beyond the grave. Nobles construct miniature versions of your grand tombs. It's like an arms race of eternity, and you're winning, but the game is spreading far beyond the palace gates. Historians still argue whether this was because the Egyptians grew more democratic in their spirituality, or because royal propaganda worked a little too well. Either way, the line between king and commoner blurs ever so slightly. If not in life, then certainly in the meticulous preparations for death. Your priests assure you that the gods favor you. They read the entrails of sacred bulls, watch the skies for rare celestial alignments, and consult oracles who somehow always seem to agree with your decisions. The truth is, you're starting to suspect the oracles might just be excellent politicians with better costumes. You sit in council chambers, where walls are draped with fine linen, and the scent of burning cedar disguises the mold creeping into the stonework. The viziers present scroll after scroll, inventories of grain stores, troop movements, taxation records. One reports that a scribe has found a new type of black ink that never fades. Imagine your decrees surviving perfectly for centuries, maybe even millennia. You pause, fingers steepled, and order an immediate supply. After all, what's the point of being a god king if your handwriting smudges into oblivion? But not all your news is good. The Hittites to the north are stirring again. Their chariots are faster now. Their soldiers clad in armor you'd rather not meet up close. You've heard tales of their iron weapons, sharp enough to split shields like papyrus stalks. You're told they have powerful kings, but you tell your generals, with a tight smile, they don't have me. Your response? You don your own battle gear, bronze-studded cuirass, a war crown with the protective cobra gleaming on your brow, and you lead your army out to meet them. It's hot, dusty work, the chariot bouncing beneath you as the horses pound over hard-packed ground. You taste the grit on your tongue, the air heavy with the tang of sweat and anticipation. The Battle of Kadesh unfolds before you, one of the greatest military clashes of the ancient world. Thousands of warriors, clouds of dust so thick you can barely see the banners whipping in the wind. You've heard both versions of this story. One where you're nearly captured but fight your way out in a display of divine bravery, and another where your general's mistakes nearly cost you the battle. Historians still argue whether your inscriptions tell the whole truth or just the version you wanted carved into temple walls. What is certain is that you returned to Egypt alive, your people greeting you as a hero. You commission massive reliefs depicting you single-handedly turning the tide of battle. It's a cinematic masterpiece. Giant you, tiny enemies, your war horse practically smirking as it tramples your foes. You also negotiate what some call the world's first known peace treaty. Of course, you still make sure the walls of your temples depict you as the undisputed victor. Just in case future historians get any funny ideas. But war is not your only concern. You've noticed your sons beginning to vie for position, their mothers whispering in their ears, carefully arranging their loyalties, like chess pieces on an alabaster board. Royal succession is rarely neat, even when there's one clear heir. And you have dozens of children. Historians still puzzle over exactly how many. Some say 50, others suggest over 100. Either way, you've been busy. In the evenings, you stroll through the colonnades of your temples, marveling at the colossal statues you've ordered erected. Each a stone version of yourself, larger than life and utterly unmissable. You run your hand along the cool leg of one such statue, the stone smooth beneath your fingers. Yes, you think, they'll remember me. But you're not content to simply exist in memory. You want to control the narrative. You instruct your scribes to record your achievements in dazzling detail, leaving out the parts that don't sparkle quite as brightly. And why not? You're shaping not just monuments, but myth. Sometimes you visit the workers' village tucked behind the cliffs, where the artisans of Deir el-Medina live in modest homes. You watch them mix pigments from crushed minerals, grind ochre into paste, and draft preliminary sketches of your tomb's murals. You're surprised to find them joking among themselves, passing gossip along with their chisels, arguing over the proper tilt of a hieroglyphic bird. You chuckle softly, realizing that even in the service of gods and kings, people will always find time to complain about their supervisors. One day, an artisan sheepishly presents you with a small, private carving. A cat chasing a mouse wearing a tiny crown. It's a harmless joke, but you treasure it, slipping it into your robe pocket. You like the idea that even eternity should have room for a little mischief. Meanwhile, you continue to build, to celebrate, to expand your story across temple walls and sunlit plazas. But somewhere deep inside, you know, no matter how grand your statues, no matter how carefully constructed your tomb, you can't outrun time. The paint will fade, the stone will crack, the names will erode. Still, you press on. Because maybe, just maybe, if you build high enough, deep enough, magnificently enough, you'll linger just a little longer on this earth. And you'll keep wandering these sun-baked streets and cool temple halls, chasing the echoes of immortality, like a flicker of torchlight just around the next corner. The sun beats down on your golden chariot as you roll through Thebes, the city buzzing with celebration. Priests chant, crowds press in, tossing lotus petals at your feet. You nod graciously, though inside, you're already thinking about the next monument, the next conquest, the next way to etch yourself permanently into the bedrock of history. You've seen enough of your predecessors crumble into dust to know, if you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they'll probably get it wrong. The limestone walls of your newest temple rise before you like the ribs of some colossal beast. Workers haul blocks into place, their backs slick with sweat, their chants rising and falling in rhythm with the ropes they pull. You've ordered this temple to be unlike any other. Vast, sprawling, its pylons towering so high they might just brush the belly of the sky gods. Some advisors quietly suggest you're going overboard. But really, can a god ever go too big? Still, even as you build higher, you start building deeper. The Valley of the Kings, that sacred cradle hidden beyond the cliffs, becomes your final obsession. You're done with the pyramid game. Too conspicuous, too tempting for grave robbers. No, you want to disappear into the folds of the mountain. Your tomb hidden behind twisting corridors and false doors, designed to confound even the most persistent thieves. You imagine future plunderers scratching their heads, cursing, as they stumble upon yet another dead-end passageway. You take a quiet, petty joy in outsmarting them from beyond the grave. Historians still argue whether these elaborate underground tombs actually delayed the inevitable. Some evidence suggests many were robbed within decades, some possibly within weeks. A particularly bold theory even claims the tomb builders themselves sometimes tipped off the thieves. Trust, it seems, was yet another thing the afterlife couldn't guarantee. You consult with your architects, demanding not only secrecy but grandeur. The walls of your tomb must glow with stories, your victories, your offerings, your daily life meticulously painted in rich colors. You want the ceiling to mirror the night sky, constellations carefully mapped, so you might wander the heavens long after your body is wrapped in linen. And your burial goods? Nothing is too excessive. You've seen the lists: golden thrones, alabaster jars, intricate canopic chests, jewelry embedded with lapis lazuli and carnelian. Every item must serve a purpose in the next life. And yes, perhaps a few more for the simple pleasure of having nice things. A little gilded overkill never hurt anyone, unless you count the taxpayers footing the bill. But you're not the first to take afterlife preparations to extreme lengths. Word filters through your priests of a much older ruler, King Jur from the First Dynasty, whose tomb was found packed not just with treasures, but with something far more unsettling: the remains of over 300 people, apparently sacrificed to accompany him into eternity. It's a chilling practice called retainer sacrifice, where loyal servants were expected to die with their king so they could keep serving him forever. Imagine that staff meeting. Historians still debate whether these sacrifices were voluntary, ritualized, or, let's be honest, completely forced. But the practice eventually fades, replaced by less horrifying stand-ins like Shabti figurines, little statues that magically spring to life in the afterlife to do your chores for you. Honestly, it's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of hiring interns you never have to pay. By your time, human sacrifice is out of fashion, but the desire for elaborate company in the tomb persists. You hear of a pharaoh buried with millions of human hair wigs, another who takes his pet cat into eternity with him, mummified and adorned like royalty. Even in death, pharaohs cling to their earthly comforts: silk, gold, and apparently very good hair days. And yet, despite all these precautions, most tombs still fall prey to looters. The grand exception is one that survives because it's forgotten, buried beneath the rubble of time until a lucky archaeologist stumbles upon it thousands of years later. Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose modestly sized tomb somehow escapes the greedy hands of grave robbers. His treasures gleam untouched, a golden time capsule waiting to blind the modern world. You wonder if your tomb will be so lucky. You wonder if your carefully plotted mazes and curses will hold back the curious and the desperate. As you walk through the workshops, The scent of resin and beeswax hangs thick in the air. Artisans carefully paint delicate lotus patterns onto wooden shrines. You pause beside a craftsman carving a canopic jar, its lid shaped like the head of Duamatef. The jackal guardian of the stomach. You suppress a shudder. Who knew your intestines would one day need their own bodyguard? Still, you can't help but be impressed. The craftsmanship is astonishing. Each piece, no matter how small, is a declaration. You mattered. You were here. And you will be here long after the living have forgotten their own names. Yet, time is a tricky thing. The very priests you've entrusted with your legacy, the ones who chant your name and paint your stories, may one day find themselves out of favor. New dynasties rise. Old names are erased. Statues topple. Temples are defaced. Even the mighty Akhenaten's name is struck from monuments after his religious revolution collapses. And you may one day be next on the list. Historians still puzzle over how quickly pharaohs could fall from grace. Was it politics? Personal vendettas? A simple reshuffling of religious priorities? Whatever the reason, erasure in ancient Egypt isn't just about forgetting. It's a second death, the most feared fate of all. But tonight, you push these thoughts aside. The flicker of oil lamps casts dancing shadows over your golden death mask. The artisan's steady hands working late into the night to perfect its expression. A serene, timeless face, the face you'll wear forever. You walk back toward the palace, the cool stone walls offering a welcome respite from the heat. Somewhere, music drifts through the air, lyres and flutes weaving a melody that reminds you of river currents and wind through papyrus reeds. You pause just for a moment, allowing yourself the luxury of listening. You realize then that all this, the temples, the armies, the endless preparations, is not just about power or vanity. It's about not being alone, about leaving enough of yourself behind, that some part of you will always linger, even if just as a whispered name or a worn hieroglyph on a temple wall. And so, you step forward, already imagining the next statue, the next inscription, the next piece of eternity you can grab hold of. After all, you've got forever to fill. The years pass, and your kingdom hums along the steady rhythm of the Nile. Flood, sow, harvest, repeat. But in the quiet corridors of your palace, something gnaws at you. Time. Even the most golden of reigns will one day end. And what happens then? Who will tell your story when your voice is gone? You've already set plans in motion. Your scribes are busy chiseling your deeds into stone. Your sculptors crafting towering colossi in your likeness. You will not be forgotten. But still, a kernel of doubt remains. Because the truth is, the more you study the pharaohs who came before you, the more you realize just how quickly even the mightiest can fade. Historians still argue whether the grand pyramid builders like Khufu were truly revered in their own time, or whether their people quietly resented them. Did Khufu's workers sing his praises, or did they grumble as they hauled stones under the blistering sun? The answer may never fully surface, but either way, Khufu's pyramid still casts its long shadow across the desert. You visit the plateau yourself, standing before the Great Pyramid. The stones stretch impossibly high, the angles so precise they seem almost alien. You can't help but admire the sheer audacity of it. A monument so massive, it dares the centuries to try and erase it. But even these mighty pyramids, with their secret chambers and angled passageways, couldn't outsmart time. Looters tunneled in, treasures vanished, sarcophagi were pried open by candlelight. Even the carefully carved curses left to ward off intruders seem to serve more as a challenge than a deterrent. It's almost funny. The more elaborate the tomb, the more determined the thieves. And so pharaohs began to adapt. You see their strategies unfold like a cautious chess game. Sneakier tombs, hidden deep in the Valley of the Kings. Winding corridors like the roots of a great tree. They painted their walls not just with religious texts, but with fantastical maps of the underworld. A cosmic GPS to help their souls navigate the perils beyond. You trail your fingers along one such painted wall, tracing the shape of the serpent god Apep, enemy of the sun. The walls here hum with stories. Boats sailing through the night sky. Guardians wielding flaming swords. Monstrous creatures with the heads of lions and crocodiles. It's all part of the pharaoh's grand strategy. If you can understand the dangers of the afterlife, maybe you can outwit them. But let's be honest, this is starting to sound a lot like the ultimate anxiety dream. Imagine prepping for a journey where one wrong turn could leave your soul devoured by a hippo-headed demon. No pressure. Of course, no one took this journey more seriously than the pharaohs themselves. You hear of a particular king who wasn't content with the usual collection of treasures. No, he chose to be buried with an arsenal of hair wigs. Historians still scratch their heads over this one. Was it a fashion emergency kit for the afterlife? An extreme case of vanity? Or perhaps an elaborate joke lost to time? The truth remains tangled, much like the wigs themselves. And then there's Ramses II, Ramses the Great, who seems to have taken the go big or go home philosophy to its absolute peak. You picture him striding through his enormous temples, nodding approvingly at statues that reach 5 times his own height. He rules for 6, but the pharaohs weren't all warriors and builders. Some reshaped not just the land, but the very soul of Egypt. Akhenaten, remember him? The rebel king who dared to topple the entire pantheon in favor of one god, the Aten, the sun disk. He moves the capital, changes his name, and bans the old god's temples. Talk about a bold career pivot. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten was a visionary monotheist, an eccentric radical, or simply a shrewd politician trying to centralize power. His elongated statues and androgynous depictions spark debates even now. Was this his true form, a new artistic style, or a symbolic expression of divine unity? His wife, Nefertiti, stands by his side, her name forever linked to beauty and mystery. The limestone bust of Nefertiti, with her elegant neck and serene gaze, becomes one of the most recognizable icons of ancient Egypt. Yet her fate is shrouded in questions. Did she rule after Akhenaten's death? Did she vanish from records as part of a political purge? Historians lean in, dusting papyrus fragments, still chasing whispers from a time where even stone forgets. After Akhenaten's death, the pendulum swings sharply back. The next pharaoh, a boy king you've definitely heard of, Tutankhamun, quickly restores the old gods, their temples, their priests, their songs. It's like the entire country collectively agrees to pretend the whole Aten experiment was just a bizarre phase. Some even go so far as to erase Akhenaten's name from monuments, an ancient version of hitting undo on a grand scale. The boy king's reign is brief, his tomb small compared to his predecessors, but his story explodes into modern fame thanks to its remarkable preservation. His golden mask, serene and flawless, becomes the face of ancient Egypt itself. His treasures, chariots, jewelry, even a dagger made from meteorite, captivate the world. And yet, despite all this grandeur, some scholars believe Tutankhamun was a frail young man, plagued by health issues, walking with a cane. His life, his reign, his carefully staged immortality all may have hinged on the fragile bones of a boy in a man's world. As you reflect on these rulers, their obsessions, their splendor, their desperate, almost frantic attempts to secure immortality, you start to sense the thread tying them all together. Whether through colossal monuments, religious revolutions, or pet cats mummified in gold, they all wrestled with the same question. How do you beat death? Some tried with stone, some with stories, some with spells. Some left their names chiseled so deeply into temple walls that even millennia couldn't fully erase them. Others disappeared into dusty silence, their grand plans outsmarted by time. You walk along the silent valley, the limestone cliffs closing in like ancient sentinels. The sun dips low, casting the tomb entrances in long, reaching shadows. For all their might, their gods, their armies, and their treasures, the pharaohs were chasing something profoundly human. The hope that their lives would echo long after their hearts stopped beating. You keep walking, deeper into the valley where the pharaohs sought refuge from oblivion. The mountain walls are steep here, their surfaces weathered, but still hiding secrets beneath layers of sand and stone. The very air seems thick with stories, as if the cliffs themselves are whispering the names of long-forgotten kings. One name you can't shake is that of Pharaoh Djur from the First Dynasty. His tomb, discovered centuries later, revealed something more chilling than piles of gold. Archaeologists found the remains of over 300 people buried alongside him. Men, women, servants, officials, and perhaps even family members. Retainer sacrifices, they call them. The ultimate take-it-with-you mindset. You can almost picture the grim ceremony. As the pharaoh's body was prepared for burial, these loyal attendants may have gone willingly, or perhaps not, believing they would continue to serve him in the afterlife. Imagine clocking out of your palace job for the very last time and realizing your severance package is permanent. Historians still argue whether these sacrifices were truly voluntary or forced. Some suggest a mix of religious zeal and royal coercion. Others think it may have been considered an incredible honor, a fast-track ticket to paradise, albeit a very abrupt one. Either way, it's a haunting glimpse into just how far the ancient Egyptians were willing to go to secure the pharaoh's journey beyond. Thankfully, by the time of the New Kingdom, this grisly practice faded away. Perhaps the people began to think, quietly, cautiously, that maybe there were other, less fatal ways to support their king's eternity. Instead, offerings of food, statues, Shabti figurines, tiny servants for the afterlife, and elaborate wall paintings replaced the need for human sacrifice. Not that all later pharaohs embraced simplicity. Some got even weirder. Take Amenhotep II, for example. When his tomb was opened, archaeologists found millions of meticulously arranged human hair wigs buried with him. Not gold, not lapis, not alabaster. Wigs. Historians still scratch their heads over this. Was it a profound religious symbol? A strange royal fetish? Or maybe he just didn't trust the afterlife's hair care options. Honestly, who among us hasn't panicked over a bad hair day? And then there's Ramses II. Yes, the one with the epic temples and the reputation for fathering entire soccer teams of children. Turns out, he was also buried with his pet cat. Not just any cat. This feline was carefully mummified and adorned, its journey into the afterlife secured alongside its royal human. It's oddly comforting, isn't it? For all their colossal egos and world-bending power, even the mightiest pharaohs couldn't bear to leave behind their fluffy companions. Historians still debate whether this was a singular affection or part of a larger symbolic practice. Either way, Ramses' tomb whispers of the simple joys he wasn't willing to part with, even in death. Yet despite their ingenious efforts, hidden tombs, cursed doorways, endless tunnels, many of these royal resting places were still looted over the centuries. Tomb robbers worked by flickering torchlight, cracking open sealed chambers, brushing past millennia of carefully laid defenses for a chance at quick, glittering reward. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The more elaborate the protections, the more tempting the prize. The more secret the location, the more determined the thieves. Except, of course, for one tomb that slipped through the cracks. Tutankhamun's, buried in a relatively modest chamber, obscured by the construction of later tombs, Tut's final resting place went unnoticed for centuries. It was pure cosmic misplacement that saved his treasures from plunder. When Howard Carter pried open the tomb in 1922 and famously peered inside, he found wonderful things: chariots, golden thrones, beds, jewels, the iconic death mask that would travel the world centuries later. Historians still puzzle over why Tut's tomb was so intact when nearly all others were stripped bare. Was it the tomb's accidental concealment? Or rush to complete the burial after the young king's sudden death? A dash of ancient luck? Probably all three. And maybe the universe just had a soft spot for the boy king. What's fascinating is that despite all the riches, the tomb was relatively cramped. Some scholars think it wasn't even meant for Tut originally, but hastily reassigned after his early demise. There are signs that parts of the wall paintings were finished in a hurry. Brushstrokes still visible under ancient varnish. You can almost picture the palace in chaos. Royal embalmers scrambling, artisans working by oil lamp, priests muttering incantations on fast forward, all to meet the sacred timeline. Pharaohs were supposed to be buried within 70 days of death to align with religious tradition. And Tut, even in death, was no exception to the schedule. As you meander through the story of the pharaohs, a pattern emerges. For all their obsession with eternity, their afterlife plans were often rushed, altered, or unraveled entirely by time. It's like the old joke about building IKEA furniture. No matter how carefully you follow the instructions, something's always missing, backwards, or mysteriously extra. But the pharaohs didn't just leave behind gold and stone. They left clues to their lives, their quirks, their fears. And thanks to modern science, we're now peeling back layers they never intended us to see. CT scans and DNA tests allow us to virtually unwrap mummies without ever touching them. Scientists can now examine bones, reveal long-healed injuries, diagnose ancient diseases, and even trace family trees through genetic markers. It's how we know Tutankhamun likely walked with a cane, suffered from malaria, and may have had a clubfoot. It's how we've linked certain mummies to their royal descendants, connecting generations that time had tried to sever. Historians still debate just how accurate these genetic reconstructions are. Preservation, contamination, and incomplete records leave room for plenty of scholarly squabbling. But each scan, each DNA strand, pushes us closer to understanding the true faces behind the gilded masks. And in a way, the pharaohs got what they wanted after all. You can't help but smile at the irony. They may have dreamed of eternal life in the fields of reeds, but instead, they live on in lab reports, museum displays, documentaries, and bedtime history scripts like this one. Thousands of years later, you're still tracing their stories, following their footsteps through the sand, marveling at their grandeur, chuckling at their oddities, and yes, pondering their stubborn, deeply human quest to outwit the ultimate deadline. You pause, imagining the silent corridors of the tombs, the painted walls, the forgotten trinkets, The pharaohs are long gone, but their stories breathe still, whispered by the stones, revealed by the science, and now echoing softly in your own imagination. You drift further along the dusty corridors of ancient memory, the flicker of your imagined torchlight dancing across walls painted with scenes of grandeur, battles, and rituals. And here, in these painted halls, you meet the legendary personalities who would come to define not just Egypt's history, but the world's collective image of what it means to be a pharaoh. There's Ramses II, Ramses the Great. His name seems to be etched on everything from colossal temples to forgotten stones by the roadside, almost like ancient graffiti. You get the feeling Ramses may have had something of a branding obsession. If it existed, he probably wanted his name on it. Ramses ruled for an astonishing 66 years. 66. That's enough time to build cities, wage wars, strike peace treaties, and raise a family large enough to populate a small nation. In fact, Ramses is believed to have fathered over 100 children. Historians still debate the exact number, though, as ancient records tend to blur the lines between literal and symbolic listings. Was it truly over 100? Or was that an ancient way of saying, "Trust me, I was very busy"? His reign is marked by extraordinary building projects, including the monumental temples at Abu Simbel, carved directly into the cliffs. Imagine standing beneath those towering statues of Ramses, their gaze still fixed on the horizon, as if daring time itself to erode their legacy. These temples were constructed with such precision that twice a year, the sunlight penetrates the inner sanctuary to illuminate the statues within. Coincidence? Probably not. The architects knew exactly what they were doing. Ancient Egypt wasn't just stacking stones and hoping for the best. Historians still argue whether Ramses' famous Battle of Kadesh was a grand victory or a diplomatic draw. The ancient records, written by Ramses himself, of course, are a little one-sided. It's like reading a Yelp review written by the restaurant owner. He painted himself as the hero, single-handedly defeating the Hittites in glorious fashion. Modern analysis suggests the battle may have actually ended in a stalemate, but Ramses spun it as a PR triumph anyway. Honestly, who can blame him? If you're going to be remembered for eternity, you might as well give yourself a 5-star review. Then there's the matter of Ramses' appearance. His well-preserved mummy shows he had striking features and, intriguingly, flaming red hair. Scholars still debate whether this was his natural color or the result of post-mortem chemical changes. Was Ramses a ginger king? It's a quirky detail that sparks the imagination. Just picture a red-headed ruler commanding armies and overseeing temple construction beneath the scorching Egyptian sun. You can almost hear the palace buzzing with activity, scribes recording royal decrees, architects drafting blueprints in the sand, children playing in marble courtyards. It's all so vividly alive, yet impossibly distant. But Ramses wasn't the only ruler who shook Egypt to its foundations. Flashback to the 18th dynasty, where you encounter Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to rewrite the rules of the universe. Akhenaten wasn't content with just building temples and leading armies. He set out to change Egypt's entire religious structure. Imagine waking up one morning and finding out your country now only worships one god, the sun disk Aten, and that all other gods, including the mighty Amun, have been effectively cancelled. That's what Akhenaten did. He shattered centuries of religious tradition, closed temples, moved the capital to a new city, which he built from scratch, and even changed his own name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, devoted to Aten. Historians still debate whether Akhenaten's motives were spiritual enlightenment or a bold political strategy to consolidate power. Some say he genuinely believed in the exclusive worship of Aten. Others suggest he was cutting the influential priesthood down to size. Either way, his reign was a seismic shock to Egyptian society, and by his side stood his chief queen Nefertiti, arguably the most famous woman in ancient Egyptian art. Her painted limestone bust, with its elegant neck and striking features, has captivated the world since its discovery. But Nefertiti wasn't just a pretty face. She ruled alongside Akhenaten as an equal partner, and may have even assumed power in her own right after his death. Some scholars propose that Nefertiti briefly ruled Egypt under the name Nefer-Neferuaten, while others think she may have vanished from the historical record for more mysterious reasons. The truth remains elusive. Historians still argue whether Nefertiti's disappearance from inscriptions signals her death, political exile, or an ascent to Pharaoh in disguise. But Akhenaten's radical sun worship experiment didn't stick. After his death, his successor, none other than his own son, Tutankhamun, swiftly reversed the reforms, reopened the temples, and restored the old gods. Akhenaten's city was abandoned, his statues defaced, his name chiseled out of history. Talk about a divine fall from grace. It's a recurring theme in Egyptian history. Attempts to break from tradition often snap right back. Like a cosmic bungee cord, no matter how far you leap, you're always pulled back to the familiar. And speaking of unforgettable rulers, you can't pass through this chapter of history without meeting Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh of Egypt. Forget the Hollywood stereotype of Cleopatra as just a seductive beauty lounging on silk cushions. The real Cleopatra was a multilingual, politically savvy, fiercely intelligent ruler who navigated a crumbling empire with precision. She spoke at least 9 languages, struck complex political alliances, and steered Egypt through decades of turmoil. Cleopatra's relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony are legendary, but they weren't merely romantic escapades. They were calculated power plays in a world dominated by Roman ambitions. She fought to preserve Egypt's independence, though in the end, it wasn't enough. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra died by the famous asp bite, or if that's just a poetic invention. Some argue she may have used a fast-acting poison, while others think the snake story was a Roman flourish meant to dramatize her end. Whatever the truth, her death marked the final curtain for the age of the pharaohs. With Cleopatra, the line of divine rulers faded, and Egypt became a Roman province. But her legend only grew, echoing through art, literature, and pop culture for millennia. So here you are, tracing the footsteps of these extraordinary rulers. Ramses the Great, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, each carving their own mark into the stone walls of time, each shaping the destiny of their people in ways that still ripple through history. The sun sets over the Valley of the Kings as you pause to marvel at these pharaohs, not just as distant rulers, but as people who loved, feared, schemed, built, and sometimes lost everything in the pursuit of eternity. You continue to drift deeper through the golden corridors of history, your fingers trailing along cool, dust-covered walls, still echoing with the stories of ancient Egypt's mighty pharaohs. Their monumental ambitions may have shaped the skyline of their kingdom, but the lengths they went to in pursuit of immortality? That's where things get truly bizarre. It wasn't enough to carve their names into temples or build statues the size of apartment buildings. Some pharaohs took their obsession with the afterlife to extremes that make you stop and blink in the flickering torchlight. Take the curious case of tomb building in the Valley of the Kings near Thebes. Earlier pharaohs had boldly constructed pyramids that pierced the sky, colossal stone stairways designed to carry their souls to eternity. But over time, those conspicuous structures became irresistible beacons to grave robbers. After all, if you build a mountain of treasure in the middle of the desert, someone's going to get curious. So later pharaohs pivoted. They abandoned the flashy pyramids and instead began carving their tombs deep into the rugged cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. These were sprawling labyrinths of stone, hidden from view and carefully engineered to mislead and trap intruders. You can almost feel the claustrophobia pressing in as you imagine yourself winding through these narrow tunnels. With walls designed to trick you into thinking you've reached the burial chamber when you've only found another dead end. Historians still argue whether these hidden tombs genuinely succeeded in deterring grave robbers or merely delayed the inevitable. After all, over centuries, even the most secret tombs were eventually breached. But the pharaohs persisted, layering false doors, deceptive passages, and even deadly traps in their subterranean fortresses, all in the hope of safeguarding their precious cargo, their own mummified bodies, and the glittering treasures meant to accompany them to the afterlife. Yet, if you think secret tunnels and misleading blueprints were the height of funerary eccentricity, you haven't met King Jair from the First Dynasty. When archaeologists uncovered his tomb at Abydos, they found something both extraordinary and deeply unsettling: the remains of 318 men and women buried alongside him. These weren't symbolic figures carved in stone or painted on walls. They were actual people, likely sacrificed upon Jair's death in a grim practice known as retainer sacrifice. The belief that these servants, officials, and perhaps even family members would continue to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife, just as they had in life. You pause here, the weight of this ancient brutality settling heavily around you. Imagine being so committed or coerced into royal service that your employment package included following your boss into the great beyond. Historians still debate the precise nature of these sacrifices. Were they willing participants, chosen as a sacred honor, or were they victims of a system that saw them as mere accessories to the king's eternal comfort? Thankfully, by the time of Egypt's New Kingdom, this grim tradition had fallen out of favor. The ancient Egyptians found more symbolic and frankly less horrifying ways to ensure company in the afterlife. Human sacrifice was replaced with shabti figures, small statuettes that, according to belief, would spring to life and perform duties for the deceased. A more humane substitute, though possibly less effective if you actually wanted your wine refilled in the underworld. But don't think the pharaohs lost their taste for strange burial companions. Take Amenhotep II, for example. When his tomb was opened, archaeologists found something peculiar. He had been buried with millions of human hair wigs. Yes, millions. Not statues, not jewelry, wigs. Imagine the shipping list for that. Historians still puzzle over the meaning of this odd collection. Was it a symbol of wealth and beauty? A connection to his royal image? Or did he simply have an obsession with hair that followed him beyond death? It's a quirky detail that stands out among the typical golden sarcophagi and ceremonial boats. And then there's Ramses II again, whose tomb contained the preserved remains of his beloved pet cat. Ancient Egyptians, of course, adored their feline friends, often depicting them in art and even granting them divine status. But Ramses' decision to take his cat with him into eternity feels strangely personal. A soft reminder that even the most powerful pharaohs found comfort in their pets. You start to sense that for all their divine pretensions and monumental egos, these rulers had distinctly human attachments, whether to their loyal servants, their beauty rituals, or their purring companions. But despite all their careful planning, elaborate defenses, and strange burial choices, the truth is this: most royal tombs didn't remain untouched. The centuries weren't kind to their treasures. Grave robbers chipped away at seals, dug through walls, and looted the very things meant to guarantee the pharaoh's eternal joy. The tomb of the famous boy king Tutankhamun survived purely by accident. Buried hastily in a relatively modest tomb, his final resting place was soon buried under debris from later construction, effectively hiding it from view for over 3,000 years. It was this lucky misplacement that preserved Tutankhamun's astonishing treasures, allowing Howard Carter's team to stumble upon the find of the century in 1922. Without that fluke of fate, Tut might have joined the long list of pharaohs known only by their plundered tombs and vandalized monuments. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun's fame is truly due to his own historical importance or whether he's simply the best preserved example of royal burial. It's a fair question. He wasn't the most powerful or longest reigning pharaoh. In fact, his reign was relatively brief and largely shaped by the advisors around him. Yet his golden death mask has become one of the most iconic images in the world. Modern archaeological science continues to peel back the layers of the past. CT scans and DNA testing now allow researchers to virtually unwrap mummies without disturbing their delicate wrappings. These advances are rewriting what we thought we knew about royal lineages, familial relationships, and even ancient health problems. You almost feel like you're being given a backstage pass to a history that's still unfolding. So, in a strange twist, the pharaohs did achieve a form of immortality, not through their grand temples or their carefully crafted burial plots, but through the enduring fascination they spark in modern hearts and minds. Their stories, their mysteries, their towering monuments, these have transcended time in a way even they couldn't have fully planned. You wander further, the air growing cooler, as if you're being gently drawn deeper into their world. Their afterlife preparations were elaborate, their beliefs profound, their superstitions sometimes a little odd, but what shines through is the universal human desire to be remembered. And in that, the pharaohs truly succeeded. You step quietly now, further into the shadowy labyrinth of ancient Egypt's royal legacy, where each torch flicker casts dancing hieroglyphs across the walls, as if the past itself is whispering secrets just beyond your reach. And as you move deeper, you begin to realize the pharaohs were more than just rulers. They were personalities, titans whose names still echo through history's grand halls. Among them, Ramses II looms tall, a name you've probably heard, though maybe you didn't know the man behind the monument. Ramses the Great, they called him, and not without reason. His reign stretched an astonishing 66 years, making him one of Egypt's longest-serving pharaohs. Imagine that. 6 decades of absolute power. You'd barely get through your presidential term before Ramses would still be carving another temple. Historians still debate whether Ramses II truly earned the reputation as Egypt's greatest warrior king, or whether his scribes simply knew how to, let's say, generously pad his resume. His most famous military campaign, the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, is plastered triumphantly across temple walls in what can only be described as the ancient equivalent of a heavily edited highlight reel. It shows Ramses charging fearlessly into battle, arrows flying past him as his war horses rear dramatically. Was it really that heroic? Or was it, perhaps, the ancient Egyptian version of a humble brag? Scholars still argue whether Ramses' account was a little too polished. But what isn't debated is the sheer scale of his building projects. Ramses left his signature across Egypt like a pharaoh's version of spray paint tagging. From the sprawling temples of Luxor to the awe-inspiring colossi of Abu Simbel, his monuments are everywhere. You can't walk 10 steps without bumping into something he either built, expanded, or engraved his name on, sometimes even chiseling over the names of earlier rulers. Smooth move, Ramses. And when his mummy was discovered, Ramses didn't disappoint. CT scans revealed a man of impressive stature with sharp, noble features and, brace yourself, naturally flaming red hair. That detail startled many. In ancient Egypt, red hair was often considered a symbol of power, but also carried associations with chaos and the unpredictable desert god Set. Historians still puzzle over whether Ramses' fiery locks were a genetic quirk, a political symbol, or just a coincidence lost to time. Oh, and about his personal life. Ramses was, shall we say, quite prolific. It's estimated he fathered over 100 children. Imagine trying to organize that family reunion. Historians still debate the exact number, but whether it was 100 or merely several dozen, Ramses was nothing if not dedicated to building both monuments and an extensive family tree. But let's rewind just a little to another towering figure in the royal family album, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. If Ramses was the ultimate traditionalist, Akhenaten was the rebellious teenager of the pharaonic lineage. Coming to power around 1353 BCE, Akhenaten flipped the table on centuries of Egyptian religious tradition. He famously rejected the sprawling pantheon of gods in favor of one, a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Imagine the shock. Egypt, with its temples dedicated to hundreds of deities, was suddenly told, "Sorry, folks, we're a one-god shop now." That's the kind of change that earns you some very frosty dinner invites. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten was a true monotheist or if he was simply trying to centralize power under a cult that conveniently put him as the main conduit to the divine. Either way, he didn't just tweak the system, he bulldozed it. In fact, Akhenaten went so far as to change his name. Born Amenhotep IV, meaning Amen is satisfied, he abandoned the god Amen entirely, adopting the name Akhenaten, effective for Aten. He even moved the capital to a brand new city called Akhetaten, or modern-day Amarna, constructed almost overnight in the blazing desert. You can practically hear his advisors sighing in the background. But he wasn't alone in this radical vision. At his side stood his chief queen, the dazzling Nefertiti. You've probably seen her limestone bust, regal, poised, the ancient world's equivalent of a glamour icon. But Nefertiti was more than just a pretty face. She was a powerful political player, often depicted wearing the crown of a pharaoh and even taking on kingly roles in her husband's later years. Some scholars believe she may have briefly ruled Egypt in her own right, though the evidence is as hazy as a sunrise over the Nile. Historians still puzzle over what truly drove Akhenaten and Nefertiti's religious revolution. Was it genuine spiritual conviction, a political chess move, or something we haven't fully grasped yet? The answer remains tantalizing, out of reach, but all revolutions come with consequences. After Akhenaten's death, the people wasted no time in tearing down his temples, dismantling his statues, and erasing his name from official records. His successor, none other than a boy king you've definitely heard of, Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun, still a teenager, swiftly restored the old gods, moved the capital back to Thebes, and even changed his name from Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of a pretty clear sign he was hitting the undo button on Dad's radical legacy. Scholars still debate whether Tutankhamun was a true decision maker or simply a puppet king guided by powerful court officials, eager to return Egypt to its familiar religious rhythms. Either way, his reign marked the swift end of the Aten experiment. And speaking of unforgettable pharaohs, you know we can't leave without visiting Cleopatra, the last and perhaps most legendary ruler of ancient Egypt. Cleopatra VII has been immortalized as the irresistible seductress, but the truth is much more layered. Cleopatra was no wide-eyed damsel. She was a razor-sharp politician, fluent in 9 languages, and the only member of her family to actually speak Egyptian. Her charm wasn't just in her looks, it was in her ability to command attention, forge alliances, and hold her crumbling kingdom together with sheer force of will. Historians still argue whether her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were driven by genuine affection or cold political strategy. Either way, Cleopatra played her hand as well as anyone could have in a game dominated by Rome. But even her formidable intellect couldn't stave off the inevitable. With Cleopatra's death, by snakebite according to tradition, though that too is contested, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Egypt slipped under Roman control. Yet Cleopatra's legend only grew. Over centuries, she became a symbol of beauty, seduction, power, and resistance. A queen whose story has been told and retold in plays, novels, and films. Her myth, like the golden masks of pharaohs long buried, has outlived the woman herself. You step carefully through this gallery of giants: Ramses, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, each a glittering thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of ancient Egypt. Their stories are tangled in debates, shaded by mystery. But one thing is certain, they all understood the same timeless truth. It's not enough to rule in life. You must echo in eternity. And now, as you linger among the monumental shadows of Egypt's greatest rulers, their ambition echoes around you, bouncing off the weathered stones and sandy pathways. The legacy they carved into the landscape is undeniable. But what about their final resting places? Their last grand gestures against time? You walk a little further, feeling the weight of those tomb doors pressing shut behind you. You already know the obsession the pharaohs had with immortality. You've seen the pyramids rising like stone staircases to the sky. And you've crept into the tunnels of the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs of the New Kingdom traded open-air monuments for hidden tombs carved deep into the cliffs. These rock-cut tombs weren't just built to protect the pharaoh's treasure. They were designed to protect the pharaoh's soul. Grave robbers were a constant threat, and the architects went to great lengths to foil them with labyrinthine passageways, false doors, and cleverly concealed burial chambers. You'd think they were building escape rooms instead of eternal homes. Yet, despite all their tricks, most tombs were still looted, stripped of their treasures, leaving only the quiet remnants behind. Historians still argue whether these elaborate defenses were ever truly effective, or if the thieves, often members of the tomb-building crews themselves, were always one step ahead. It's hard to outsmart people who literally built the place, but if you think secret passageways were the strangest part, wait until you hear what some pharaohs took with them. Let's start with Amenhotep II. When his tomb was opened, archaeologists discovered something bizarre. He was buried with not just weapons and statues, but millions of human hair wigs. Yep, you heard that right, wigs. Apparently, in the afterlife, having a good hair day was top priority. And then there was Ramses II, who along with his mountain of treasures, made sure to include his beloved pet cat. Because, obviously, even the King of Kings couldn't imagine facing eternity without his favorite feline companion. You can just picture the loyal little furball curled up at his feet, mummified right alongside him. But as strange as that is, nothing quite compares to the practice of retainer sacrifices. This one veers into the unsettling. In the earliest dynasties, it was shockingly common for pharaohs to be buried with their servants, their officials, and sometimes even their family members, people who were sacrificed to continue serving the ruler in the afterlife. Imagine being so dedicated to your job that your contract didn't end with your life. The tomb of King Jer from Egypt's first dynasty was discovered to contain the remains of at least 318 people who had been buried at the time of his death. Archaeologists still debate whether all of these individuals were willingly part of this grim arrangement, or if some were, let's say, less enthusiastic participants. Thankfully, by the time of the New Kingdom, this practice had fallen out of favor, perhaps because people finally realized there were limits to workplace loyalty. But even without human sacrifices, the lengths the pharaohs went to in order to safeguard their luxurious afterlives remained extreme. Tomb walls were covered in complex spells and elaborate guides, like the Book of the Dead, which mapped out the treacherous journey through the underworld. Picture it as the ancient Egyptian version of a GPS, except instead of traffic updates, it warned you about crocodile-headed monsters and lakes of fire. Missing the right spell at the right moment could mean a soul's annihilation. No pressure. Historians still argue whether these texts were meant to be taken literally or if they were more symbolic, part of a ritual framework to ease the fear of death. Either way, you wouldn't want to be caught wandering the afterlife without your magical cheat sheet. And yet, despite all their meticulous preparations, many pharaohs' tombs were eventually looted, their grand treasures lost to time or stolen by grave robbers looking to cash in. In fact, the only reason we have the near-intact tomb of Tutankhamun today is because it was accidentally buried beneath the rubble of later tombs, effectively hiding it from plunderers for thousands of years. When Howard Carter stumbled upon it in 1922, the discovery captured the world's imagination. Golden statues, chariots, jewelry, and of course, that iconic golden death mask. Each piece whispering stories from an era where life and death were meticulously intertwined. But the fascination didn't end there. In the 21st century, modern technology gave us a way to revisit these ancient rulers like never before. CT scans and DNA testing began to virtually unwrap the mummies, revealing their faces, their health issues, and even their family relationships. Tutankhamun, for instance, was revealed to have had a club foot, a cleft palate, and signs of genetic complications likely caused by inbreeding. Ancient royal matchmaking was apparently less about dating apps and more about preserving the family line at all costs, sometimes with disastrous results. Historians still debate whether Tutankhamun's early death was due to an accident, a genetic disorder, or an undetected disease. Theories range from chariot crashes to malaria to bone necrosis, but no single cause has claimed the crown of certainty. You trace your fingers along the painted walls of a tomb as you move forward. Each scene you pass, boats gliding down the Nile, servants offering heaping platters of food, gods weighing hearts against feathers, feels like a silent plea, remember me. And perhaps that's where the pharaohs actually succeeded. Their grand tombs may have been looted, their treasures scattered, but they are remembered. Through museum displays, documentaries, and the curious eyes of people like you, their stories still breathe. But even as we uncover new secrets, so many mysteries remain. How exactly did the Egyptians move those massive stone blocks? What secret ingredients preserved the bodies so well? What personal fears drove each pharaoh's fixation on the afterlife? Historians still argue whether we'll ever truly understand the deeper spiritual beliefs that made these kings and queens dedicate entire lifetimes to death preparations. Maybe we're just scratching the surface of a world more complex, more interconnected, and more human than we've ever realized. You step quietly, feeling as though you're walking between two worlds, the dazzling splendor of royal courts and the hushed eternity of the tomb. And as you go, you carry the strange truth with you. The pharaohs may have lost their treasures, but they never lost their place in our imagination. Their obsession with cheating death may not have worked quite as planned, but in a way, they found something even rarer. They are remembered. Thousands of years later, you are here, walking their sacred halls, listening to the echoes of their hopes, their fears, and their golden dreams. You keep walking, deeper into the labyrinth of memory, where the walls seem to pulse with the weight of stories both glorious and grim. The mighty pharaohs, for all their elaborate rituals and stone fortresses against time, still left behind traces that even now spark our curiosity and sometimes our confusion. You've glimpsed the lengths they went to in securing their afterlives. But who were these pharaohs, really? Not just the shimmering death masks, not just the builders of obelisks and tombs, but the flesh and blood rulers who walked the palace corridors, who ruled, who laughed, who schemed. Some names shine brighter than others in the tapestry of Egyptian history. And right now, you stand at the threshold of their lives. You're about to step into the stories of the most famous and infamous pharaohs who ever wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Their legacies still loom large, larger than the stone colossi that bear their likeness. First, there's Ramses II. You can't wander through the world of ancient Egypt without brushing past the echoes of Ramses the Great. He wasn't just any pharaoh. He was the pharaoh. The man reigned for 66 years, a staggering lifetime on the throne. To put that in perspective, if you started kindergarten when Ramses took power, you'd retire with grandkids before his reign ended. Ramses stamped his name across Egypt like an ancient influencer tagging every photo. Temples, statues, steles. You'd be hard-pressed to find a spot in Egypt where Ramses didn't leave his mark. Luxor, Karnak, Abu Simbel. He built them, expanded them, or chiseled his name onto existing monuments like a royal graffiti artist. Historians still argue whether Ramses' reign was truly as golden as his monuments suggest, or if the sheer volume of self-promotion simply overwhelmed the record books. Did he win all his battles? Did he negotiate peace? Or was it more a tactical standoff? The famous Battle of Kadesh, often celebrated as Ramses' crowning military achievement, might have been more of a draw than a decisive victory. But that didn't stop him from advertising it as a glorious triumph. You can't help but admire the confidence. His mummy, when discovered, revealed a man of striking features, with a tall frame and, believe it or not, flaming red hair. Imagine that, Ramses the Great, strolling through his sun-baked kingdom, a literal redhead in the land of gold. And while we're counting, legend holds that he fathered over 100 children. That's not just a family tree, it's a family forest. His sprawling lineage and his imposing monuments, and his uncanny ability to brand his reign have immortalized him as Egypt's ultimate builder king. But then you shift your gaze across time and see another figure, Hatshepsut. She wasn't supposed to rule as a king, but she did, and spectacularly. You step softly into her story, where the lines between gender and power blur beneath the desert sun. Hatshepsut was the fifth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, and one of the few women to take the title of pharaoh. she didn't just settle for ruling behind the scenes. No, she claimed the full regalia, the royal kilt, the pharaoh's beard, the whole package. She commissioned grand temples, expanded trade networks, and ushered in a period of prosperity that Egypt hadn't seen in generations. One of her crowning achievements? The mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Its elegant terraces still cling to the cliffs like a staircase to the gods. Historians still argue whether her assumption of pharaonic power was a brilliant political maneuver to stabilize the kingdom, or an outright power grab. Some even question whether she was forced into kingship by circumstance, or whether she seized it with cunning precision. The ancient records? Well, they're suspiciously quiet about the opposition she faced. What's certain is that after her death, her successor and stepson, Thutmose III, tried to erase her from history. Her name was chiseled out, her statues smashed, a methodical campaign to strike her reign from memory. But ironically, the very attempt to erase her may have helped preserve her story, sparking centuries of curiosity and debate. And then, you cross paths with the heretic king, Akhenaten. Oh, this is where Egypt's story tilts sideways. Born as Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten took the throne and promptly upended 1,500 years of religious tradition. Imagine walking into a company where everyone's been using the same computer system for generations, and on your first day, you delete the whole thing and install your own software. That's essentially what Akhenaten did. He abandoned the crowded pantheon of Egyptian gods and declared that there was just one god worth worshipping, Aten, the sun disk. He even changed his own name to Akhenaten, which means effective for Aten. He shut down temples, moved the capital to a brand new city called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, and plastered the walls with images of himself and Aten in an unusually naturalistic style. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten was a true monotheist in the modern sense, or simply elevating Aten above all others while tolerating some lesser deities in private. Was this a genuine spiritual revolution, or just a pharaoh's personal obsession with the sun? His chief queen, Nefertiti, is equally enigmatic. You know her, the one with that striking limestone bust that's become a global symbol of beauty. Together, they ruled in this bizarre chapter of Egyptian history, where the art grew more intimate, the religion grew more exclusive, and the sun shone as the solitary divine power. But Akhenaten's revolution didn't last. After his death, his successor, brace yourself, it's a familiar name, Tutankhaten, soon renamed Tutankhamun, restored the old gods. It's like the next CEO promptly rebooting the old system and pretending the last few years never happened. Akhenaten's statues were smashed, his city abandoned, and his name all but erased from the records. Tutankhamun's decision to undo his father's changes would secure his place in history, not because of his policies, but because of his near-perfect tomb. Funny how sometimes your greatest legacy comes from the simple accident of being left undisturbed. You stroll through these tangled legacies, Ramses with his sprawling monuments, Hatshepsut with her delicate mastery, Akhenaten with his radical sun worship. Each pharaoh, so different in their pursuits, yet united by the same shimmering dream, to be remembered forever. And as you pause here, surrounded by their stories and shadows, you realize that memory is the truest treasure of all. More than gold, more than grand tombs, it's the telling, the remembering, the leaning in just a little closer that keeps them alive. You move forward now, deeper still, stepping into the lingering presence of a figure you already know, though perhaps more by accident than by achievement. Tutankhamun, or as the world knows him, King Tut. He's everywhere, on t-shirts, museum banners, and the occasional Halloween costume. But the irony? His fame rests not on his life, but on the fact that he was forgotten. Tutankhamun came to the throne around the age of 9. Imagine that. Barely out of childhood, still probably tripping over his own sandals, suddenly elevated to living god status. His reign was short, maybe 9 or 10 years, and much of his rule was likely orchestrated by powerful advisors who nudged him carefully back to the old ways after his father Akhenaten's disruptive religious experiment. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun wielded any real power, or whether he was a puppet king for the priests and officials desperate to restore balance. His youthful death left more questions than answers, and scholars continue to debate the cause. Malaria, a chariot accident, genetic disorders, or maybe a lethal combination of all three. But here's the delicious twist of history. His early death meant a hastily prepared tomb, and that hasty burial, tucked away and forgotten, saved his treasures from the greedy hands of tomb robbers. When Howard Carter cracked open Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the modern world gasped. Gold shrines, chariots, statues, and of course the now iconic death mask, a face that has become the global ambassador for ancient Egypt. The sheer wealth and artistry inside that compact burial chamber stunned the world and kick-started what some call Tutmania. And tucked among all that splendor, 2 daggers, one of iron, the other of gold. The iron dagger, especially, holds its own peculiar secret. Modern analysis shows that the iron blade came from a meteorite, literally forged from the stars. Ancient Egyptians called iron metal from the sky. In King Tut's case, that wasn't just poetic flair, it was scientific fact. You can almost imagine the boy king gripping his meteorite dagger, perhaps unaware he held in his hand a piece of the cosmos. But while Tutankhamun's tomb dazzled the modern world, his life remains something of a blurred image. His mummy reveals a fragile young man with a clubbed foot and other signs of genetic disease, likely the product of generations of royal inbreeding. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten or the offspring of another branch of the royal family, though genetic studies suggest he was Akhenaten's child, and possibly the product of a sibling marriage. It's one of those moments where history blushes a little and looks away. You step carefully away from Tutankhamun's golden glow and move toward the shadowy outline of another towering figure, Cleopatra VII. You've heard the name whispered across centuries, painted as the ultimate seductress, the last pharaoh, the queen who charmed 2 of Rome's most powerful men. But Cleopatra's story isn't just about beauty. In fact, the ancient coins that bear her image show a woman with a sharp nose, a prominent chin, not the idealized face you might expect. She wasn't famous for her looks. She was famous for her mind. Cleopatra spoke at least 9 languages, a rare skill for Egyptian rulers, many of whom stuck primarily to Greek. She was a skilled negotiator, a keen politician, and a woman navigating the razor's edge of survival in a crumbling dynasty. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were grand political strategies, genuine romances, or something far more complex, a blend of survival, ambition, and human connection. You picture her now, draped in fine linen, gold armlets catching the flicker of oil lamps, speaking smoothly in Egyptian when her predecessors clung stubbornly to Greek. She knew her people. She knew how to rule. Cleopatra's reign wasn't just about lavish banquets and secret trysts. She stabilized Egypt's economy, controlled famine, and navigated the brutal politics of the Mediterranean world, caught between the ambitions of Rome and the preservation of her own kingdom. Her final days are shrouded in as much mystery as her life. Most remember the tale. Cleopatra, cornered by Octavian's forces, supposedly pressed an asp, a venomous snake, to her breast and slipped into death. But historians still argue whether the snakebite story holds water. Some suggest poison smuggled in a hairpin was more likely. Others even doubt whether she committed suicide at all, though most lean toward it being a deliberate, defiant exit. What is certain is that with her death, Egypt's age of pharaohs ended. The Roman Empire claimed Egypt, and the Nile's divine rulers passed forever into history. And as you walk through the dust of centuries, you find yourself returning to the idea that all these rulers, Ramses, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, were mortal. For all their godly titles, they faced the same vulnerabilities, the same fears, the same universal truth that life is fleeting. You can almost hear their voices echoing through time, not in the booming declarations of stone inscriptions, but in softer, more intimate ways, the way Tutankhamun's fragile bones speak of pain, the way Cleopatra's coins whisper of strategy over vanity, the way Hatshepsut's erased statues speak louder than the ones that survived. And you realize, each of these pharaohs, in their own way, waged war against oblivion. Some fought with temples and statues, others with golden treasures, still others with bold decisions and risky alliances. But none could truly escape time's slow unraveling. The ones we remember, like Tutankhamun and Cleopatra, are sometimes those who paradoxically were almost forgotten or tragically defeated. It's as if history itself has a sense of irony. And as you walk quietly through these shadowed halls of memory, you can't help but wonder, what will endure of us? What little fragment might slip past the cracks of time to tell our story? Maybe it won't be gold or stone, but a story, a whisper, a name, gently spoken in the future's ear. You keep moving, almost as though the sands of the Nile are gently urging you forward, brushing at your ankles as you step toward the crumbling edges of ancient power. You've walked alongside mighty kings and cunning queens, through golden halls and sacred tombs. But there's still something more lingering in the air, something that pulls at the quiet corners of your curiosity. It's the ordinary people, the artisans, the farmers, the builders, the ones who toiled under the searing Egyptian sun to raise the very monuments we now admire. While the pharaohs claimed to be gods, their divine status would have crumbled to dust without the sheer human effort behind them. You wander now through the village of Deir el-Medina, the home of the tomb builders, tucked discreetly into the hills near the Valley of the Kings. This place isn't just piles of stone. It's a rare, intact settlement that tells us what life was like beyond the palaces and temples. The walls of their humble homes are still scribbled with prayers, shopping lists, and the occasional bit of ancient gossip. You pause to glance at a faded ostrakhan, a pottery shard where someone, perhaps bored on a hot afternoon, doodled a quick sketch of a pharaoh looking just a bit silly. Apparently, even divine kings weren't safe from the ancient equivalent of office jokes. Historians still argue whether Deir el-Medina was truly a community of free artisans, or if their golden job came with invisible shackles, a privileged life, but with tight control and limited freedom to leave. The evidence tugs in both directions. You drift into the daily rhythm of their world. Workers marked their absences with detailed records, sometimes citing illness, family funerals, or in a rather relatable entry, simply noting they were drinking with a friend. Some things, you realize, don't change across millennia. The workers here had an unusually high literacy rate for the ancient world. They could write, keep records, and even lodge formal complaints. One preserved document reads like the world's earliest angry Yelp review, where the tomb builders protested delays in their grain rations. It's almost comforting to know that missing lunch delivery could rile up an ancient Egyptian as much as a modern office worker with a missing coffee order. And here's the quirky twist. Many of these workers built their own tombs while crafting the pharaohs. Some of the finest non-royal burials we've ever discovered belong to these craftsmen, filled with beautifully painted scenes of the afterlife and loving family depictions. It's like they took all the artistic secrets of the king's tombs and gifted themselves mini versions. As you step through these narrow streets, the lives of these ordinary people feel surprisingly close, tangible in a way that the pharaohs sometimes don't. They lived, loved, squabbled, and built greatness while quietly hoping to secure their own slice of eternity. Yet even for these skilled workers, the shadow of the pharaoh loomed. The obsession with the afterlife wasn't just for kings. It seeped into every corner of Egyptian culture. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, here's another delightfully strange custom. Ancient Egyptians often wore perfumed wax cones on their heads during festivals. These slowly melted, releasing fragrance throughout the celebration. Imagine trying that at your next party, walking around as a scented candle in human form. But behind the light-hearted details, you sense something deeper. A civilization locked in a constant dance with death, yet filled with an undeniable zest for life. They farmed the Nile's rich soil, raised families, adored their cats, and meticulously tracked the stars. And you pause now to think about those stars, the same ones you saw twinkling above Ramses, above Akhenaten, above Tutankhamun. The Egyptians were expert astronomers. Their temples aligned with solstices, their calendars mapped the flooding of the Nile, and their stories were stitched into the constellations. But they also believed the stars were homes for the souls of the dead. Historians still argue whether their astronomical knowledge was strictly religious, or if they harbored practical, scientific curiosity that transcended their spiritual frameworks. Maybe it was both. In Egypt, the sacred and the scientific often held hands. You glance back at that meteorite dagger from Tutankhamun's tomb, the literal connection between the heavens and the pharaoh. To the Egyptians, it wasn't just cosmic iron. It was a celestial blessing, a piece of eternity brought down to earth. You move now among the closing chapters of Egypt's golden age. As Greek and then Roman influence crept in, the old gods didn't vanish overnight. They adapted. Isis and Osiris became household names far beyond Egypt's borders. The mighty temples stood, sometimes repurposed, sometimes quietly abandoned, their grand halls slowly filling with drifting desert sand. Even when Christianity spread, traces of the old religion clung to local practices. People still whispered the ancient names, still revered the symbols carved into crumbling stone. Egypt's divine kings might have fallen, but their legacy slipped into new stories, new myths. You realize now that Egypt's obsession with immortality kind of worked, just not the way they expected. The mummified pharaohs didn't rise to rule again, but their memory outlasted empires, languages, and entire civilizations. And isn't that the deeper magic? To be remembered, to be studied, to have your name spoken thousands of years after your bones turn to dust. Your feet carry you now along paths not just through ancient sites, but through the libraries, museums, and whispered bedtime stories of the modern world. Egypt is still alive, in curiosity sparked, in documentaries watched under cozy blankets, in hieroglyphic doodles copied in school notebooks. Even the debates persist. Did Ramses the Great really fight the Battle of Kadesh to a stalemate? Or was that just some truly impressive royal propaganda? Was Cleopatra's legendary beauty a political tool, or has history overblown her allure while underestimating her mind? Did Akhenaten's religious revolution truly reshape Egyptian theology, or was it quickly erased like a cosmic blip? You smile, realizing that Egypt keeps its secrets close, always a little out of reach, like the shimmering heat waves dancing above the desert. And perhaps that's why you're still here, wandering quietly through these stories, drawn deeper and deeper, not just by the gold or the mummies, but by the shared human threads, the loves, the loss, the dreams of living forever. ... You slow your pace now, sensing that you're nearing the edge of this journey, the final whispers of an ancient world that still lingers just beneath the surface of our own. Your steps are softer now, your breathing slower, as you find yourself winding through the last layers of this ancient tapestry. You've walked the corridors of palaces, crouched inside tombs, listened to the whispers of queens, and touched the dust that once coated the sandals of pharaohs. And yet, Egypt's story isn't done with you. Not yet. You're moving into the final chapters, where the mighty kingdom that once built eternal monuments gradually surrendered to the slow tides of time and foreign rule. The end of the pharaohs was not a sudden collapse, but a slow fade, a long sunset that stretched over centuries. Cleopatra VII, remember her? The last in a line of rulers who wore the double crown of Egypt. Her reign feels close now, her world both familiar and impossibly distant. You can almost hear the gentle lapping of the Nile as you approach her palace, the murmurs of traders in Alexandria, the scent of salt in the air, mixed with exotic resins and oils from distant lands. Cleopatra's story is the final note of the pharaonic symphony. She was a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, but Cleopatra broke the mold of her Macedonian predecessors by actually learning the Egyptian language. She wasn't just a foreign ruler draped in Egyptian symbols. She immersed herself in the culture, embracing the role of the divine queen. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's political power was driven more by her intellect or by her famous liaisons with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Was she a master strategist who used romance as one more tool in her arsenal? Or have later storytellers simply flattened her into the seductive caricature we love to repeat? The answer probably drifts somewhere in between. You glide through the palace corridors, picturing her in her prime, commanding fleets, brokering deals, maneuvering between the crushing weight of Roman ambition and the fragile sovereignty of her beloved Egypt. She was, in every sense, the last pharaoh. When she took her final, fateful step, whether by the bite of an asp or by poison carefully prepared, she didn't just mark the end of her own life. She marked the end of pharaonic Egypt itself. After Cleopatra, Egypt became another glittering gem in Rome's crown. The temples fell silent. The sacred rituals, passed from priest to priest for millennia, faded like smoke on the breeze. And yet, Egypt didn't vanish. It transformed. Its language, its art, its myths, some survived, some morphed, some were buried under layers of sand and conquest. The pharaoh's eternal quest, it turns out, didn't die with Cleopatra. Their names, their stories, their treasures, they linger, calling us back again and again. You drift now through the museums of the modern world, where their relics rest behind glass. The golden mask of Tutankhamun, staring out with timeless calm, the colossal statues of Ramses still radiating power even when toppled. The fragile papyrus scrolls that carry ancient hymns across the centuries. Even in these sterile, softly lit halls, the magic persists. You see children pressing their hands and faces to the glass, their wide eyes reflecting golden crowns and sapphire amulets. You hear the hushed reverence in whispered school tours, and you realize the pharaohs won. They are immortal, just not in the way they imagined. Modern science, too, has become part of their story. Remember those CT scans and DNA tests? They've allowed us to peer under the wrappings without disturbing the sacred bodies. We've traced family lines, uncovered old injuries, even revealed what some pharaohs probably looked like in life. But some things remain elusive. The precise cause of Tutankhamun's death, still debated. The exact location of Nefertiti's tomb, still hidden. The truth behind the mysterious Dendera light carvings, still fueling wild theories and scholarly shrugs alike. Historians still argue whether we will ever truly understand the minds of the pharaohs, their most secret fears, their private thoughts, the layers behind their carefully constructed images. Some mysteries may simply refuse to be solved, as though the ancient kings and queens are still guarding their secrets from beyond. You realize now that Egypt's greatest legacy may not be its monuments, nor even its art. It might be its power to keep us asking questions, to lure us in, generation after generation, with stories that feel both otherworldly and strangely familiar. The pharaohs remind us of the universal human condition, the fear of being forgotten, the yearning to shape the world, the hope that some small part of us might live on. You see it now in the carefully carved names, in the golden sarcophagi, in the desperate rituals to preserve the spirit. The same thread weaves through your own life. Your modern world may not build pyramids anymore, but the desire to leave a mark, to craft, to create, to remember, is still beating in your chest. And so, you come to the edge of this journey, where the desert meets the cool breath of the Nile, where the living still glance back toward the silent stone giants that refuse to crumble. You've wandered through palaces, trudged across battlefields, slipped into sacred tombs, and strolled the lively markets of a world long gone. And yet, Egypt remains, its echoes still audible, its shadows still moving, just at the edge of the torchlight. Your footsteps slow now. You pause one last time to let your gaze linger on the hieroglyphs, to let the scent of old papyrus cling a little longer. The sand shifts softly beneath you, as if nudging you back toward your own time, your own life. But you'll carry this with you. The mighty pharaohs, the cunning queens, the clever builders. The mysteries unsolved, they're all stitched into your story now. And now, you can feel the gentle tug of sleep at your shoulders. The story has settled, like the evening mist over the Nile, soft and cool. You've traveled far tonight, across golden deserts, and through the shadowy halls of forgotten temples. And the weight of the centuries feels lighter now, fading like footsteps in the sand. The faces of the pharaohs, once stern and unyielding, seem to soften in your memory, their voices becoming little more than whispers. You've seen their glories, touched their treasures, heard their ambitions echo through stone walls. But now they grow quiet, content to rest. The pulse of ancient Egypt slows in your mind, each heartbeat quieter than the last. The grand battles, the sacred rituals, the endless preparations for the afterlife, they slip away now, like ripples fading on the river's surface. You've carried their stories, and they've left their mark on you, a faint brush of golden dust along your thoughts. A lingering fascination that will always gently tug at the edges of your curiosity. Let yourself drift now, the soft hush of desert winds folding around you, the steady murmur of the Nile lapping at the banks far in the distance. You've walked with kings and queens, witnessed the rise and fall of an empire, and unraveled secrets tucked inside ancient wrappings. And now, it's time to rest. The mighty pharaohs will still be there, waiting in their timeless slumber, ready to welcome you back whenever you feel the pull of their eternal stories once more. Good night, Nightfall History.